Well, for more on this, we're now joined via Zoom by Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk, who's with the University of South Africa's Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Peter.
So the president is painting a picture of some successes in dealing with the terrorist threat in the northern parts of Mozambique, and they've even de-escalated their profile from risk 6, I think, to 5, which means that they feel that they're in a stronger position. Is that how you would assess the situation?
In order for me to assess the situation properly, I probably would have to be on the ground with SAMIM. And by the way, SAMIM does that. They invite journalists and researchers to go on a tour, so to speak, to see what they do. And they should extend this to the SABC next time. They do that with local media. So there's a bit of information that flows beyond the very bland communiques that you get from official sources. So one has to interpret, but I think the way to do it really is to listen to the Mozambican colleagues who are researchers on the ground. And they paint a slightly different picture, which is concerning, which is one of disruption, destabilization, and ongoing violence and conflict. So is it possible to bring the two pictures together to get a composite, more integrated perspective? I guess it is. You know, in my view, it is really necessary for the region. It was necessary for the region to mobilize a military force to stabilize the situation in Cabo Delgado, which would then allow for the opportunity for other interventions to be done, particularly of a non-military kind. And so it is almost as if President Ramaphosa, who's the chair of the SADC organ, is now saying, he's the outgoing chair, the incoming one is Namibia, I think in August. He is saying that they've achieved their limited objectives, which is to stabilize the situation. It's like you freeze the situation so that you can allow other activities to take place. I'm slightly skeptical because the strange announcement in the communique is that SAMIM is moving from a scenario 6, which is peace enforcement, if you want, sort of a robust activity, to scenario 5, which is a form of multinational, multidimensional peacekeeping, but also dealing with those who, spoilers, as they call them, those who do not want to participate in a peace process. And herein lies the knot or the hub of the problem. Is it possible that the conditions are ready for a negotiated settlement or an outcome? Because I cannot imagine how else you begin to restore peace, law and order, and allow development expertise and governance experts to come in to rebuild Cabo Delgado. In fact, they talk in the communique, as you know, of a reconstruction and development plan for Cabo Delgado. And I am not yet convinced that the time is right to do that.
And if lessons can be learned from other parts of the continent, a lot of these militants perhaps may be pushed back for a time, but what they often do is regroup and come back. And so it's not that the issue is dealt with, but rather perhaps subdued momentarily.
Yes, no, indeed. I mean, this is the most difficult challenge for the SADC organ and the military component, if you want, or the defense component to deal with in a long time. Let's not forget that SADC is also present in the eastern part of the DRC, and we know from our conversations that you have with people on the ground, and from what we know from our research, that a similar situation obtains in the eastern part of the DRC. M23 rebels You think that you win, but only to discover that they reappear in a slightly different guise the next day or next week or the next month. And the same is true for the lessons that we have to learn from the Sahel, Nigeria, Somalia, and elsewhere on the continent where the problem is violent extremism. And so it's almost as if SADC is saying with almost a tone of desperation, let's design an exit strategy for Samim. Because, it's costing a fortune to maintain what we have in Cabo Delgado. As South Africans were the biggest component of the SADC force, as you know, Parliament has to approve 150 million rand every 3 months. That's a lot of money that many people will argue ought to be spent elsewhere. So there's got to be a return on the investment, so to speak. And so the hope is to stabilize the situation and then allow for that humanitarian and development and other, important objectives to take off. But I must also confess at the same time that this is what the script says. This is what you read in the book. The reality is that the Mozambican government's presence in Cabo Delgado is weak. There is the problem with corruption, which SADC won't say, but as researchers and analysts, we can see this, and we have to draw attention to the weaknesses of the authority in Mozambique to deal with Cabo Delgado, which means that I must also quickly say violent extremism is not contained within borders. It spills over. And so a regional solution to a regional problem is the only way to do this.
I think you may have partly answered my next question, and I don't want to be cynical, but do you think that downgrading from scenario 6 to scenario 5 is more about the fact that the resources aren't there, and that a downgrade makes it less of a requirement?
Yeah, I think there are two. We need to interrogate in coming days what they really mean by moving from scenario 6 to 5. And I would encourage you to look up the political head of the mission, Professor Mpho Malomo, a colleague from Botswana. He needs to sit with us and explain what that downgrade really means. I think it means two things. The one is SADC doesn't have the hardware and the tools and the resources and the money to pay for an extended presence that sort of blankets, Cabo Delgado with a military presence. It's simply too expensive and too difficult to undertake. The second one is slightly more conceptual. Scenario 6 in African Union peace and security architecture language means that there's a crisis somewhere in a country or in a region. The outside world is unwilling to participate or assist. And so the AU or SADC or one of the sub-regions then takes action, robust military action to contain, to reduce, to mitigate, to control the situation. That is what Cabo Delgado arguably needs for now, so you can stabilize the situation, so the other development partners can play their role. But if you move to scenario 5, which is now the presence of a they call it a multi-dimensional peacekeeping force, then I'm puzzled. There's no peace yet to be kept, unless you mean peacekeeping with the military. So it's a robust form of peacekeeping. So it's not the neutral blue berets that the UN sends in to maintain stability. It's actually a peacekeeping force that is going to fight a little bit harder to get the rebels out of the way. But I must say, as I talk about these conceptual difficulties, what is hovering in the background, and perhaps the elephant in the room, is the need for a sustained dialogue between the affected parties. So the rebel movement has an ideological drive, but also uses the complaints and the problems that exist on the ground in terms of underdevelopment, lack of governance, poverty, unemployment, etc., to make gains. And it's necessary for the authorities in Mozambique, the rebel movement, the victims of the situation, and those who provide humanitarian assistance to go to a dialogue table and have a sustained process of negotiation to bring peace to the region. Fighting for peace and imposing via the military might a solution from the top, I think, is what our president realizes is not going to work in the long term. So there's a lot of additional work from other partners and different people with a different understanding of the situation that is going to be required in coming months.
Professor van Nieuwkerk, I want to thank you very much indeed for your time and your insights this evening. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good night.